Good evening and welcome to the Greg Thompson Sports Show. You are here joining me tonight with our NFC East Division preview, and I am joined by none other than my friend from the Ringers Football Show, the Ringer Fantasy Podcast, the Ringer Draft Show, depending on which time of year you're following and subscribing. Mr. Danny Heifetz, how we doing, sir?
I'm fantastic, man. Thank you for having me.
Of course. It's been a lot of fun. You guys have done fantastic work, and I really enjoy the flow you guys have on the show, being able to dive in. And obviously, the Bills come up as a top conversation every now and again. Sometimes for less favorable reasons, we're trading away our wide receiver one, and then more so now with the draft. And I know, as you guys went through, there's obviously always debate on how these opportunities come up, and you have someone like Stefon Diggs, who's been such a big presence in this offense. And I know in your guys' discussions, you guys went through a little bit of where that fits in, how big of an impact that is, and what it could do across the offense. What were your initial thoughts when you saw Stefon Diggs getting traded away, going to Houston, and how big of the swing? I was shocked to see it actually raised Houston's win total by one win, and it didn't really move the Bills too much, but some of the juice dropped. I was curious on how impactful you thought it was in the name versus the actual on the field.
I think my immediate reaction was, this era of the Bills is over. I feel like we're now entering the third chapter of Josh Allen's era. Maybe
we called that one day Black Wednesday when they
Black
released
Wednesday. Black Wednesday ended it.
Yeah.
It's true though, because I feel like the first chapter of Josh Allen's career was just the proof of concept. People like me, idiots like me, were making fun of you guys for having Josh Allen.
Us too.
And it was like, oh, geez, like what? And then the Texans game, that playoff game where he was just doing too much. That was actually the end of it. Then you had the Josh Allen Diggs era, which was Buffalo is a legitimate Super Bowl contender again. And I'm trigger warning, but like, I'm sorry, but Mahomes just ended it. Like, right? Like 3 of the 4 of the Diggs Allen seasons got ended by Mahomes. And I think that now when the Diggs trade got done, I feel like this is the more with less era of Josh Allen's career. He's going to make, not quite this year, but overall he's going to make $45-50 million a year for each of the half decade, basically. And now Josh Allen has to go further with worse players. And that's probably the simplest way I would sum it all up. I also think there's a chance you got off. But I'm curious what you think. You spent all your time around this because do you think that Stefon Diggs has a year or two left in the tank and you're getting off early? Or like, was he injured down the stretch? Because Khalil Shakir had more yards than Diggs in the last 3 months. So like, do you think that he's hurt and he's going to get back? Or do you think that actually the Bills, we might look back in 6 months and be like, wow, the Bills actually pulled a fast one on Houston?
I don't think it'll go as far as they pulled a fast one. I think that there's still juice left in the tank for Diggs. I do think there's something to, if you want to, as Bills fans listening to this, want to kind of something to cling to, the idea of you'd rather be a year too early than a year too late. Yes. I do think it's very possible that after this season, you couldn't have gotten the Minnesota second round pick, which is, I think, with a rookie quarterback and everything going on there, you're thinking at least a top half of the second round pick, a top 45 pick. I think it's very possible that even if Diggs has a nice season, which I think, of course, he will, he's still a very talented player. CJ Stroud's awesome. He's going to have a nice season. I still think it's very possible that after the season, you couldn't have gotten that same pick. So if there's something to cling to, it's that, hey, yeah, maybe you did have to give up a little earlier. Of course, I would have preferred to get something in the season. I would have preferred to get something that impacts this year's performance. But if that was the trade-off of getting that better asset while eating that cap space now, and as a quick aside, you asked, what my initial thoughts were. I had been so married to the idea that, well, there's no chance the Bills are going to take the biggest dead cap hit in wide receiver history in the same season when we're trying to compete and win a championship, that they're just not going to do it. Like I had been so married to that idea that that's just a bridge too far. Even if he's a pain, we'll deal with it after this year. Because after this year, you could start to work your way around it. That I was genuinely shocked. I was just flabbergasted in the idea of, oh my God, I can't believe they're going to eat $31 million of cap space this year. So even though the cap's up, you're talking $255 million, $54 million of that is now for the Bills on players that aren't on the team. So we're only actually competing with $200 million worth of cap space. I didn't think that was going to happen. So that I had been so married to that side of it. And that's where a lot of my niche has been in the Bills, space is on the salary cap. I've had to recalibrate my entire definition of what's possible with front office and with Bean, and that, if they're willing to do that, then everything is on the table. They'll make it work. They'll figure it out. And now we get into, where do we go from here? What does that mean for the rest of the guys that are here on the roster? And you mentioned Khalil Shakir. My co-host Aaron Quinn is a fanatic for Khalil Shakir. I think people are trying to stay reasonable, but you can look at metrics that show you he was technically the most efficient receiver in the entire NFL last year. I think there's a ceiling to that as the volume increases, but it's encouraging at the bare minimum. I know some people have been an advocate of a big step forward in Dalton Kincaid. I know some people are leaning into the draft pick. We'll get to the draft in a moment here, but I like to take that you had on a recent show with the Ringer Fantasy Show. Where do you think some of this volume vacuum is going to end up in the Bills offense?
I mean, I think Dalton Kincaid's going to be a number one receiver. I think that you look at the Bills receiver depth chart and there's no obvious replacement for Diggs. Obviously, Curtis Samuel's not that kind of skill set necessarily. If anything, I actually think Curtis Samuel's almost like the Cole Beasley replacement in some ways. I think, and then you look around and I think Shakir
they tried to do it with Deontay Hardy last year, and it never quite clicked. So they're like, hey, what if we get like a better version of what that was? And you can go back and look at Joe Brady in Carolina, the best season of Curtis Samuel's career. It was like not a little bit of use, like 40 carries as a running back and a ton of bubble screens and a ton of stuff. So I'm a little curious how that gets worked in, but I do agree. I think it's high-end gadget, low-end wide receiver 2-3 type stuff, not anybody that's stepping into Diggs.
And then if anything, I look at Keon Coleman and I also wonder, he's more of like a Gabe Davis-esque player than he is Diggs, right? With Keon Coleman's a whole other conversation. But speaking of which, I actually was shopping around. I was realizing I should buy some winter jackets. Like, he's onto something.
It's fantastic. I saw some of the different clips. I saw some of the different pieces that he is just a very genuine soul. Like, he seems to, he's not putting on an act. He's not trying to get attention. He's just one of those kind of naturally funny dudes. There's a little Marshawn Lynch to him. Marshawn Lynch was in Buffalo for a while before he went to Seattle. There's a little bit of like, he's just going to say whatever's on the top of his mind regardless. And most of it to this point is very lighthearted and fun. And they just keep leaning into it, and he keeps giving more and more.
Can I share my fear with Keon Coleman?
Please.
I want to say to everyone listening, I want you to know that the Bills are like so many people. The Bills are one of my favorite teams in the league. I'm a Giants fan. Giants have sucked. My best friend in the world is like a Bills fan, and it's hard not to root for this team. So it brings me no joy to say that there's like no chance that Keon Coleman will be great. And that has nothing to do with football. It has nothing to do with tape. It's just about life. I am a more cynical person, and I look around at the constant threat of World War III around every corner, and I look at this pure, beautiful, just wondrous soul that is Keon Coleman, who's playing with himself in Madden. And playing with himself in Madden's the wrong way to say it, but he's playing as himself in Madden.
Using himself as a player.
He's playing Madden with him. That's better. But everything that Keon Coleman has said since the end of the NFL is like the funniest thing a player said. And my fear is we don't live in the timeline where someone this wonderful gets to be a great player. Like, there's just no way. Like, the world, either he will be bad and a great person, or he will be great, but the world will grind this veneer of loveliness off of him. He will either be a great player and become a worse person, or remain a great person but never be a great player. And it's not my fault. I'm just the messenger.
You can't help the world that you know. It's simply, you're just, an observer of the world. And I don't think it's an accident that when you go back, and I pulled that, kind of reference to Marshawn Lynch, there's a reason that he stands out as such an exception, is that there isn't anybody like that. There's nobody, like, people aren't like that in real life. Like, that's not how life actually works.
You know who, like, no one's ever been like Michael Jordan. What a lovely, fun person to hang out with. Like, you know what I mean?
So my daughter is getting more and more into sports, and we're watching different stuff, and she's like trying to do drawings for me and makes bracelets for me, and like is trying to get into watching where we've watched almost all the NBA playoffs, and it's just like talking about like my favorite athletes ever. And she was asking about Michael Jordan. I said, "Oh, well, was he like a good guy or a good person?" And I was like, he was really competitive. He was like, I'm not ready to have that discussion with my 10-year-old daughter, but I was like, he was really competitive.
My favorite Jordan thing is the one where the Utah waiter was like, "Hey, Mr. Jordan, it's such an honor to serve you. Just want to tell you you're the greatest basketball player ever." And he was like, and I use that as motivation. It's like, you have to be a psychopath, man. Anyway, but I do like Keon Coleman as a player. Just, guys that size don't move that way, like, very much. Yeah. It's like, there's a reason other teams wanted to get him. I'm glad you guys sniped him. I guess other teams wanted him. Maybe New England wanted him. But the reality, I actually like that you guys moved back in the draft to do it. I thought that was smart. But it's just too bad that in order for him to be great, Stefon Diggs was a great receiver. Stefon Diggs seems potentially like a suboptimal locker room influence. And I'm just saying, ipso facto, Keon Coleman, awesome locker room influence. There's a reason you had to bring in Chase Claypool, because the Bills were like, yo, be a little more like this Chase Claypool guy, and like the happy medium somewhere in between. It's like a buddy cop. If Claypool's more like Keon Coleman and Keon Coleman is more like Chase Claypool, you're going to have the greatest receiver room of all time. It'll be like Terrell Owens.
We need to keep his locker further away from him. try to keep it as pure as possible. I do agree on the field. I think his skill set, like, I get it. The 40 time wasn't ideal, but all the time speed things, all of the GPS tracking on the field, he's still one of the most explosive players, like one of the highest vertical jumps, broad jump. Like, he is an explosive athlete.
The 40 at this point, and the 40 at this point is almost an arbitrage opportunity for the NFL, because teams actively root for the players they like to do poorly at it. So that
they have a clip of Bean doing it every year. He talks about it with Gabe Davis. Literally in the, like, they do a behind the scenes embedded series where they put out snippets afterwards. And when they're watching Coleman run his 40, they talk about, oh, remember when we were hoping Gabe Davis would run a bad 40 because we knew his time speed in the game was better. We need to get to the point where the only reason it matters is it's an anchoring point mentally for the vast majority of us. We all know what a 4.45 means. We all know it's the only
athletic testing means. That means something to us, because we're like, oh, I know that frame of reference. Cause like, it's just that and like the bench press, I guess, are the only two, like, cause I always make fun. I do the draft show with Ben Solak and Danny Kelly, and I always make fun of them for talking about guys' arm, like the wingspan in inches. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, his arms are 33 inches long. I'm like, cool. What the fuck does that mean?
I haven't been measured for a jacket in a while. I don't even know what my arm length is.
Anyway, but but the point being, if you want solace in that, you want an example of someone who's found not by 40-yard dash speed, but by play speed. So the Rams found Puka Nacua.
100%. Great. It's the best possible example. And again, not saying that that's what it's going to translate to.
No, I'm saying 100% he will be Puka Nacua, guarantee.
He's going to break his NFL rookie receiving record.
But to your original point, I think the team makes sense. Khalil Shakir as, like, kind of, I don't want to say the Diggs role. It's not the Diggs role, but if he could be Z, Keon Coleman, is more like an X. But then I think Dalton Kincaid is honestly like your Kirkland brand Travis Kelce. I don't think that's necessarily what he has to be this year, but I think that over time, there's a reason Josh Allen was texting Brandon B to draft Dalton Kincaid. I think that's what it's going to be.
Well, and so I think a lot of people run with the Travis Kelce, and it's unfair for anyone to be compared to probably the best receiving tight end in history. That's not reasonable for anyone to be the standard. But go back and look at, let's say, Mark Andrews' second year in Baltimore's offense, where Mark Andrews was the number one target. There was a diverse set of receivers behind them where the number of targets who were second, third, fourth, fifth were all bunched together, but then the tight end was the number one target. Well, that year, Mark Andrews ended up with like 68 catches for 890 yards and 10 touchdowns. Like, that could be a really nice season. That's a fantastic season and a really good offense with a number one receiver being the tight end.
I like that comp too, because I think Lamar and Josh Allen, because of it's so hard to freaking sack them that they create almost like awkward for the defense throwing lanes, because they're able to create things that other quarterbacks aren't. Like one of my favorite stats in the entirety of last season for any team is that Josh Allen I guess I've never seen this measured before, but I guess they can measure how close you are to the sideline. Like the quarterback is.
I just started to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that Josh Allen completed 5 of 6 passes within 1 yard of the boundary. And the entire rest of the league was 1 for 6. And Josh Allen's 5 for 6. Like he just does things other people don't think of.
Yeah, he hit that play where he's turned it into a thing, like you said, 5 out of 6. He will scramble, then pivot and turn his shoulders to get into a good throwing motion, backpedal, and literally one time against the Patriots, pushed off his heel to where his body was over the out of bounds white and still threw it back. And again, that's a play that you literally tell every other kid as they're developing, don't ever do that. Don't ever turn and throw across your body. But when you have a howitzer instead of a right shoulder, those things are possible. And that's, you see the excitement around Caleb Williams, obviously the Patrick Mahomes Superman throw and thing. Like those guys just can do things physically that other humans can't.
Well, that's the difference between it's the path to mastery. You stop at expertise. Expertise is you learn all the rules, and then mastery is learning which ones to break.
Yeah, it's great. That's a great quote. All right. So with the Bills team as a whole, last night, Aaron and I did our running back preview. Any final thoughts on? Are you worried about Ray Davis coming in? You're a fantasy analyst. You look at, like, I think James Cook was a very pleasant surprise for everybody last year. And if not for 15 rushing touchdowns from Josh Allen, James Cook might have been even a much bigger deal when you talk about, I'll give you the same stat I gave him last night. You think about, who the most explosive running backs are in the league. You talk about Jahmyr Gibbs, you talk about Bijan Robinson. I think most people go to Breece Hall as the most explosive running back in the league, maybe Devon Achane, depending on how you look at it. Last year, James Cook had more yards on fewer touches than Breece Hall. Like, I don't think anyone thinks of him in that frame of reference or in that lens. And I'm not even making the case that he is. But last year, this is factual. There's over 281 touches to 293 or whatever it was. That James Cook produced more yards on fewer touches than Breece Hall was mind-blowing to me as I was kind of preparing for that. Where are you in kind of ranking him going into this season with the tiers? There's a little bit more. There's a lot of people, and what do you do with the Josh Jacobs of the world? What do you do with some of these other talented guys, new offenses? And now a guy like Ray Davis coming in, a 4th round pick, not a huge investment, but maybe he's a little more than what, Leonard Fournette or the leftovers of Latavius Murray were. Where is your head on what Bills fans should maybe expect from a fantasy standpoint of how you're projecting it for James Cook this year?
I love James Cook. I think James Cook is a really like he's just a fun player to watch. I know that every now and then it's just weird because it's just weird to evaluate running backs on teams where the quarterback is the goal line back. It's weird to evaluate Saquon Barkley in Philadelphia when it's like, well, Jalen Hurts is the 1 yard line guy.
When Josh Allen is like 45 pounds heavier than James Cook.
Yeah, it's really strange. So, I mean, shameless plug, but here at fantasyfootball.thruer.com, we have James Cook at 48th. They get fantasyfootball.thruer.com. There's my shameless plug. But, we have James Cook. And it's weird because in some ways, the way fantasy works, because touchdowns are so important, it's weird to evaluate like a guy that's not necessarily the goal line back. But man, in real life for the Bills, I feel like I hate to be in the parade of people saying this, but I do think there's an Alvin Kamara-esque thing to James Cook's game, and I just think that on a different team, I'm trying
if he played with Derek Carr, if you had somebody who was ready to check down all the time.
And so it's weird because I think that he's the rare player who I think is probably better than he'll ever be statistically on Buffalo, because Josh Allen, the ball, as long as the ball being in Josh's hands, is always going to be plan A, and it should be plan A and B. And so James Cook being your plan C, I think is pretty incredible. And I think that the screen game for him kind of got going down the stretch. And I think that basically that has to continue to be a weapon for them, because I do think I'm a big fan of when receivers receiving can be blocking when it's designed well.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really well said. And I think that he's a like a very comfortable high floor asset that probably doesn't have the ceiling of those other guys, because there's just not going to be those 180-yard 3-touchdown games. It's just not that likely in his workload. I do think it's likely he gets more than the 2 rushing touchdowns that he had last year. I think that was just kind of bad luck in some of that. So there were plenty of those where he had a carry from the 11 down to the 2, and then Josh pushed it in. And some of those
called the DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, yes, he will have slightly fewer DeAndre Swifts coming into this year. And then some of it, he did actually have 4 receiving touchdowns last year, and I do think we'll see as much or more involvement from there. So as we now span out a little bit, you talked earlier, you're a Giants fan. We want to talk a little bit about the NFC East here. I do think, obviously, there's a cap on excitement. There's a reason that you just furrowed your brow and kind of braced yourself. There's obviously a cap with the quarterback situation, but I got to say, it's got to be exciting to have an insanely explosive talent like Malik Nabers coming in. That at least helps reassure that, hey, we're going the right direction with someone who you can genuinely be excited about.
Let me tell you everything you need to know about Malik Nabers, and this is what I want to know about Keon Coleman. Malik Nabers doesn't have a case on his phone. That is the kind of confidence I need, because if you're like, well, what if you drop your phone? I want it to have never occurred to my alpha wide receiver that he would drop his phone. Like, it didn't even
never thought about the fact that that's a thing you might need to do.
What do you mean I would drop my phone? Like, all the photos of draft day of just that beautiful naked iPhone that Brandon, I'm like, that's my guy. But in all seriousness, Malik Nabers is incredible. If Marvin Harrison Jr. was not Marvin Harrison Jr., I think Malik Nabers would be the number 1 receiver in many.
Yeah, I think like 8 of the last 10 draft classes, Nabers would have been the wide receiver 1.
He's a special player, and the Giants need explosiveness, man. I mean, the stat, I've said this on our show, the Ringer Fantasy Football Show, but Darius Slayton has led the Giants in receiving in 4 of the last 5 years. The Giants have spent like 3 of those seasons trying to cut Darius Slayton. They can't, because everyone keeps getting hurt. Like, every offseason, the Giants try to cut Darius Slayton. They're like, shit, we can't field the team without him. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on here, but here I am. But so then you lose Saquon, and that's a whole other thing. I don't know how in depth you want me to go about the Giants, but like, I don't even get me started on the Saquon thing. But when you have the lack of explosiveness, and I hate to say it, but really, since Saquon tore his ACL, like, we've very few explosiveness. Even since Saquon high ankle sprain back in 2019, the Giants just haven't scored a lot of touchdowns. They haven't had a lot of big plays. We're in a league.
Initial bar that he set in that first and second season was so insanely high. It was always going to be impossible to then match that.
I'm stealing and butchering a stat from Bill Barnwell at the same time, but something like Saquon had like something stupid, like 6 plays of 50+ yards in 2019, which no one had done in
like a Chris Johnson, Jamar Charles
type
stat.
And then I don't know if he's had 6 since this high ankle sprain, and that was 5 years ago. And so it's sad to lose Saquon, but then I think, so to your point, the Giants have not had a player like Malik Nabers since either peak Saquon as a rookie, or really Odell Beckham circa like 2016.
And even that, like, Odell Beckham was an awesome receiver, but I think Nabers is even a little bit greater of an athlete, like even a little bit more explosive as an athlete, which is crazy to think about how awesome, young, and healthy OBJ was.
I don't want to pretend like he's, because Odell, the slants Odell would just take to that. Odell was like a special. There's something about the juice, but you guys know it with Josh Allen, where there's every now and then your team has the guy that you get cut to on red zone, and like that's the Bills now with Josh. He's in that elite, capital E elite tier of like when, you know, whoever your red zone is, Scott Hansen, Siciliano, whatever. And they're like, now look what Odell Beckham just did. And you're like, everyone's like, oh my God. And like, that's your guy.
Well, now, for the first time in my life, I've been a Bills fan my entire life. I just turned 43. I've lived outside of the Buffalo area for my entire adult life. So the last 25 years, I've been outside of Western New York. I've never in my whole life had other like organic Bills fans. It's always been people who moved, people whose dad was a Bills fan. In my neighborhood now, I live in a nice little, planned neighborhood here in here. There are 3 different boys that are like 8, 10, and 12 who are all Bills fans and wear Josh Allen jerseys, and they're fans because of Josh Allen. That's never happened in my entire life, that like kids who don't grow up in that area or have any familial tie to Western New York choose to be a Bills fan. They're just, that guy has never existed to draw that in. And now having like that kind of potential is really fun. It's a really fun idea that now, again, the Giants are a huge historic fan base, so that there's been more of that organically than there was with Buffalo, but having that guy is really fun.
Yeah, and again, that guy wasn't like Eli Manning. I don't even know if he was quite that. Eli Manning was never that cool. So, it's nice for the Giants to have Malik Nabers, but overall, the Giants are. I mean, let's do the real thing, because the whole thing is Giants are like, oh, we got Brian Dable, we got Joe Shane. It's like the Bills' brain trust, dude. People. I am on board. I think
it's good.
I tend to have hot takes on coach. Not hot take. I'm right, and other people aren't there yet. But like, but I a lot of people they lost faith in the Brian Dable, Joe Shane process. And part of it's because the Jets have held on to their brain trust for a long time.
Yeah.
The Giants now have been blown out. Like, look, if you just measure like non-competitive games more than the Joe Judge era, but I still look at like Brian Dable is like, I don't want to let this guy go, and I would like him to extend beyond the Daniel Jones era.
He'd be unemployed for moments. It might be back to an OC. There's a chance he'd have to take a step back, but he would either get another head coaching job or have a half dozen play caller jobs ready at his footsteps the moment he was available.
Okay, hypothetical? Can I hijack your show?
Yeah.
Hypothetical. Good Bills season. Josh pulls a hamstring or something. Season ends like, 11-5, but kind of disappointing ending. But you guys look good. But, you go out first round of the playoffs, but like Josh pulled a hamstring and it's like not a long-term injury. You're out. Okay. Sean McDermott's fired. Oh, no, sorry. Let me tell you. Like, weird thing like this. Sorry, let me rewind. Sean McDermott is, the season was going to go fine if Josh had played. We probably could have made a run. Giants fire Brian Dable and they replace him with Bill Belichick. Brian Dable's a free agent. Would you fire Sean McDermott and hire Brian Dable as your head coach at the end of the season if the Giants replaced Brian Dable with Bill Belichick?
The fact that I don't have an immediate answer is probably my answer. Like I don't know that the answer is yes, but you would have to have a meeting.
Yeah.
Like you would have to sit down and have a meeting. Like I spend a lot of time defending Sean McDermott because obviously the Bills haven't gotten over the hump.
Well, was it the greatest 4 years you've had in 25 years?
Correct.
Was that
correct? Correct.
Was it like the 45 wins in 4 years?
Yeah, the fact that he's gone to the playoffs 5 out of his 6 seasons and we hadn't for 17 straight seasons prior to that.
And then the Super Bowl or we failed expectations.
Correct.
Yeah, no.
The fact that he has the highest win percentage in franchise history, higher than Marv Levy. Yeah, that might come in.
That's actually incredible.
But I openly admit that there is a point. There is a point where you have to accept that, like, hey, he was the guy to do this. Is he the guy to do that? Like I acknowledge that, like, you do reach that point. I don't know for sure that Dable is that guy. I think that obviously I think he was a really exciting combination with Josh. Their personalities, his play style with Dable's vision for what an offense can be in the NFL was perfect. It was just such a great melding of those two entities that I would be tempted. I would have the meeting. I would want to talk through it. And, it would be one of those things where I think, I think some fans listening right now, well, couldn't you just try to pay him $5 million as the offensive coordinator? I think their personalities clashed enough that would not come to pass. But
that's why I'm not a billionaire, because I'm just like, why don't you just pay the good people like a lot more money?
Yeah,
I'm like, just pay them more and then have the best coaching staff. And I'm like, I guess that's why I don't have $7 billion to buy a team.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, because we would have spent all of the money by the time we got to that point. But yeah, it's something that I think is in play, and I think that there's, when you're made the first season of what they did with Daniel Jones, which I think got everyone legitimately, at least whether excited or open to the idea of, oh my God, is this going to work? Is he the quarterback whisperer that just fixes big, athletic, rangy guys and makes it work? Obviously, I think that's come back down a bit. You now have this season where you're financially tied to him, but then your options open up dramatically after this year. You've got bookend tackles, you've got the weapon at receiver, you can make do with the rest. Now you look at that, I was a little surprised as kind of preparing for the show here. In my mind, I think the NFC East has compressed a bit. Like in the last couple of years, it's been two of the best, two of the top 5 in the NFC, and then two of the bottom 5 in the NFC. And in my mind, it's, I think the two at the top had kind of rough off seasons, lost some talent, had some turnover, and the two at the bottom kind of came up. I was a little bit surprised that both the Giants and Commanders are 10-1, like plus 1,000 to win the division. And then the Cowboys and Eagles are plus 120 each, kind of at a dead even tie. But I was a little surprised. I was expecting to see that compress and come back to the pack a little bit more than what Vegas apparently sees it as.
Well, I can answer that one. It may feel like it compressed because the Eagles and Cowboys, frankly, had the two most embarrassing playoff exits of every team, right? Yeah. So you look and you're like, well, why would those teams, why are the Giants not considered more competitive? All politics are local, right? Yeah. And in football, it's the same thing. It's divisional politics. What do you guys do? You kick the. Can I would you prefer I don't curse?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
You kick the piss out of the Dolphins every time you play, right?
It is nice. It is really enjoyable that Josh Allen just owns the Dolphins.
You're 6-1 in the last 3 seasons, I think, and the only game you lost was that Heat game.
Yeah.
The Giants are 1-14 in their last 15 games against Dallas.
Oh my God.
1-14. The Giants beat the Cowboys in 2021, and the Giants beat the Cowboys in 2016. So and the Eagles, let me just real quick. The Giants, let me do this live 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. In the Giants' last 21 games against the Eagles, they are 4-18 or 4-17 in their last 21 games with the Eagles. So
the equivalent here, that's what it's turned to, since Brady left, you have the wind game against the Patriots.
Yeah.
The crazy wind game. That's it.
Yep.
The Bills have won every single other one. The Jets actually have been kind of a bugaboo for the Bills, their defenses. And then it's actually much farther. It's closer to what you said with the Dolphins. There was a Charles Clay Hail Mary at the end of a Dolphins-Bills game, and he couldn't come forward and catch it. If he had caught that, Josh Allen would be 15-1 in his career against the Dolphins. Instead, he's 14-2 because Charles Clay couldn't catch the Hail Mary.
And there you go. So Josh Allen's 14-2 against the Dolphins. That is, the Giants are the Dolphins in this division against Dallas and Philadelphia. Wow. And so they're not, that's why they're 10-1. And Washington, frankly, hasn't fared much better. Washington's got this whole new thing. They have a rookie quarterback. And so at Dallas, I don't think Dallas is a serious Super Bowl contender. Jerry Jones has lost it. Jerry Jones is not running. Jerry Jones is
how
love and respect, lights on, no one home.
The numbers coming out, you always think of, they're the big market, big money, throwing money around team. And to see that in the last decade, they're literally the least cash spending team in the NFL is absurd. It's crazy to think about that. They were always the one who bought everything.
I think what we're watching, frankly, is a transition from a person I wish I had thought to bring this with me, but there's an incredible stat on just how teams have performed with teams run by someone who bought the team versus teams who run by someone who inherited the team. The people who are smart enough to make the money themselves and buy it just do better, straight up.
Significantly outperform the people who inherited the team.
Incredibly outperform. And then the exceptions are the people who hire incredibly good people get out of the way. So the Hunt family owns the Chiefs. They were really lucky Andy Reid was available. Just give it to Andy Reid. That's easy. So I think what you're watching with Dallas is the cash spending part. And to be clear, they're saving money because they have to pay Dak and CD and Mike.
Right. They have 3 huge contracts coming up. 3 huge contracts.
Having said that, dead last, Dallas Cowboys. I think what you're watching is a transition from the person who bought the team, Jerry Jones, where his entire thing was to win Super Bowls, to Steven, who's running a larger business conglomerate, frankly. And the Cowboys, nothing they've done makes sense. They have just gotten destroyed by Dak Prescott's agents at every turn. Yeah. Dak is approaching the most leverage for a player we've ever seen in a contract negotiation.
I've seen cap people project that 3 years, $200 million is not out of the question.
Yeah,
when he hits true free agency, he may be able to get 3 years, $200 million.
Yeah,
$6 million a year.
I think that Dak will probably take like 94% of what he could have gotten and just stay with Dallas, but it's a catastrophe because the entire leverage teams have is you don't hit true free agency. The Dallas has given him that. And then also Jerry's saying that they want more leaves to fall. Basically, they want to wait to do the CeeDee Lamb deal. I'm not a billionaire. Maybe that makes sense. Another thing. That's not how you do business in the NFL.
No.
Like, you don't wait to sign someone like CeeDee Lamb because then people like Brandon Ayuk and other people pass. They're going to lap you. So it's all kind of a mess. But the CD,
to give an example, Josh Allen was the exact opposite. There were a lot of people
get it done
who were
first.
very anxious of like, hey, I know 2019 was encouraging and like it seems like he could be something good, but are you sure you guys want to pay him? At the time, $43 million. It was coming in second behind Mahomes as the second highest paid quarterback. And then he had the 2020 season and went forward and like, oh my God, this looks brilliant. Not only did you lock it up, but at that point it was the last year of his rookie deal. He had his 5th-year option deal and then a 6-year contract. So I just had this on a previous show. The other contract that just got signed, what was the big one that just came out? The 4-year contract.
Goff.
Jared Goff. So Jared Goff's contract, it's a 4-year extension that just got signed. How long do you think that ends after Josh Allen's original extension expires?
Oh, at the same time, because Josh Allen did a 6-year deal, right?
0 years. Yeah. They expire at the same time. Yeah. And having that locked up, it was actually a 6-year deal plus the 5th-year option in the front. It was actually a 7-year deal. And that was 3 years ago and seems forever ago.
Yeah.
It's going to expire at the same time as Jared Goff's new deal.
And Josh isn't going to come complain because he's making $250 million. Correct. So it's, he wants to win a Super Bowl. So no, you do those things earlier. I mean, it's funny, all the consternation about the Lamar Jackson contract. Well, Jalen Hurts signed and Lamar Jackson, they basically just copied and pasted Hurts' contract and added like $500,000. And that's how this stuff works. But so, yeah, anyway, that's a long way of saying Dallas, I think, will continue to be what they've been, which is a perennial regular season contender that frankly, doesn't have the front office leadership to be a Super Bowl contender. And that's why I think the odds make sense. Is Eagles and Cowboys are plus 120 or, basically one almost co-favorites, and Washington Giants are not co-favorites. Like they're co-favorites to come in last. That's exactly how it should be.
Yeah. It was a little shocking going into it. And you look at, I do think if you're really looking at it, maybe there's reason to lean Eagles more than Cowboys. I think there's obviously just some maybe fan base value that gets tied to there. Like I know that I've read some things how like the Steelers never actually have clean odds because there's so many people that just blindly bet on them from their fan base that like it always costs them like a point or two in what the spread actually should be.
That's always like the some of that with Bears. Do you remember there was this thing of like, oh, Mitchell Trubisky is the most bet player for MVP? I'm like, yeah, that's because like it's April and somebody just went on a bachelor party from Chicago and just bet like.
And Chicago's a huge city. Like that's it. Yeah, there's like, a lot of Bears fans.
Like that's nothing to do with it. But
just credit to you. I love your take. That there's a chance Caleb Williams is the greatest quarterback in Bears history by Halloween. I think was
I mean that. I'm not even tripping. Like if you look, the history of Bears quarterbacks is so bleak. Jay Cutler was 500.
The fact that people know the name Sid Luckman is your example. Like the fact that people even know that name because he has to be brought up so much because there's been no quarterback in the 70 or 80 years since that man played is the reason.
My favorite thing is that Bears fans will say that the best quarterback in Bears history is Jim McMahon because he was just kind of there when they won the Super Bowl. Jim McMahon says the Chicago's where quarterbacks go to die. Yeah. And so, but no, I think Caleb Williams in Chicago is set up incredibly well. And then we'll see.
And has a chance to be the biggest star in that city since Michael Jordan. Like he legitimately has a chance to take that city by storm.
100% because Michael Jordan's Michael Jordan, but then you got like it's a short list because I think the Cubs were a collective effort more than an individual player.
I don't even have like I think like Mark Pryor and Kerry Wood. Like I don't even know like who I would tag the World Series year to.
Yeah, like Rizzo and Kyle Schwarber. There were moments, but it was just like all of them. And
Derrick Rose had his moment, but then his knee got tore up.
Exactly, and then honestly, it's the hockey players. It's like Patrick Kane. So I mean, I think football's always the biggest sport, like if you're good. So
and I've had talks about like the modern quarterback and will Caleb Williams his shtick kind of work in an NFL locker room. I said if they start out like 6-2, like every, Sal and Frank in Chicago is going to have a pink phone case and paint his nails like immediately. Like it will universally be accepted.
The answer to most questions about locker room issues in all sports are, if you're winning, it's fine.
Yep.
Like it doesn't really matter what's going on if you're winning.
It's the, it is the best cologne possible. It covers everything. All right, man, this is fantastic. Really appreciate your time. I know you gave it an endorsement earlier, but for anyone who hasn't checked it out, make sure that you're looking at fantasyfootball.theringer.com.
Yeah, fantasyfootball.theringer.com. We got our rankings there. And then also, the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. If you like, we talk about football, but we also have a lot of dumb arguments too. And I think
some of the best nonsense.
We almost killed you once. I remember you did you fall in the shower?
Yeah, so I do, like, I get up in the morning. I have one of the little Bluetooth speakers that I can move around with me. I start listening to some of my shows, and I'll have it like on the counter. I put it like up on the top of the shower and listen as I'm going through there. And oh God, I'm gonna have to remember what it was. There was something that you and Danny were going back and forth every once in a while. I do relate to DK a lot because he'll say some things that he and I are the same age that'll go over your
he talks about Zima, and I'm like, no idea what
it's like, so I'll relate to him sometimes and connect with a couple things. And there was one where I physically laughed hard enough that I slipped in the shower and almost like hit my head.
I love the idea of you like hitting your head and bleeding out, and like you're listening to us argue about like something as in your final moments, or like you're like, look, no, walk away from the white light, and it's just I don't know, us arguing about like how many cities are like whether Pittsburgh and Philadelphia can be in the same city.
Yeah, or Umbop or whatever, just something really poignant and resonant. I appreciate it, man. This was a ton of fun. Honestly, guys, I joke, I tweet at the guys all the time. It's one of my favorite shows. So if you enjoy listening to the stuff here at Cover One, you guys will love everything over at the Ringer Fantasy Football. Make sure you check them out. You could find Danny. Where can the people find you on Twitter and on the social medias?
Danny_Heifetz. So easy to spell. You probably don't even need me to spell it out. So just Danny_Heifetz. You got that. It's super easy to find.
We'll put it in the show description here. You can see it on the screen for everybody watching. Danny, appreciate your time. For everybody else listening, we appreciate you guys jumping in. And on that, we are out.